Well, good afternoon. What I thought today, what I'd like to do is actually cover three main aspects related to the Yolo Bypass. A bit of a historical perspective of where we've been in the management of the flood control system and the creation of the Yolo Bypass. I'd like to further discuss the planning efforts going to further shape the bypass. And then lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit of the current efforts that are going on at both a federal, state, and regional efforts to guide the implementation and the interactions further in that. I just thought as a really kind of a general overview a little bit, this is a slide that I've got from the State Plan of Flood Control folks. And this reflects the State Plan of Flood Control and what it kind of, this is a nice graphic from the National Geographic. It kind of frames the Central Valley as a whole. There's the San Joaquin side of the system, and there's also the Sacramento side, and this is the part of where the Yolo Bypass. One thing to recognize in the State Plan of Flood Control that is there's 1,600 miles of federal state levees. It's an extensive system of bypass and floodways. There are two completely different river basins, both the Sacramento and the San Joaquin, number of tributaries, a lot of small communities within here. And of course, more important, we have a lot of endangered species and a large amount of population living in the floodplain at 1.3 million. And of course, the risk is estimated at $80 billion. That's on the light side. I think a little bit of a perspective, the Sacramento Valley itself is visual as a reflection of essentially where the valley looked in the 1850s, and essentially a big inundated swamp and overflowed lands. You have the Sutter Buttes, water would flow and overflow its banks. Same thing with the Feather, the Yuba, and the American, and then make its way out through the Delta. As time went on and as settlements occurred in the Central Valley, it became clear that a bigger engineering solution was needed. In 1910, a Jackson Plan was created, which created the system that we have today, which is that aspect of bypass, starting with the Butte Sink, Sutter Bypass, working out to the Yolo Bypass. The system here was actually noted, it was actually designed on really a very narrow record of historical hydrology. And the system has served us fairly well, but as we can see from the future, it looks like that we had a lot less flood events that we're seeing in the last 50 years of the century. So the system has served us well, but probably its design was a little under-designed to the current hydrology that we're seeing in the state. A little bit more specific is I want to talk about the Sacramento Weir, and there's a number of activities surrounding it. The Sacramento Weir is where flow actually works out of the American River and the Sacramento makes its way out through the Sacramento Bypass. The weir was completed in 1916. There's 48 manual operating gates with flashboards, and as you can see during the high water events, it's quite a, how would I say it, the immediate interest to watch us at the Department of Water Resources when they open the gates. The operation of that gates are based on an operation at I Street, and right now it's at 27.5 under the old datum. The design capacity is at 112,000 CFS and is again released in the Yolo Bypass. One of the efforts right now, and we'll talk a little bit more, is the actual improvements of Sacramento Weir based on the supplemental funding that's been provided under WRDA 16. A little bit of just a kind of a view of how Fremont Weir and Sacramento Weir operate. This is a bit of the historical record. Fremont Weir is much more designed to flow than the Sacramento Weir. Sacramento Weir, based on its operational criteria, generally only operates in rare occasions, where the Fremont Weir has a number of years where it operates. Typically, its operation is in the hydrology. It starts in maybe as much as in December and makes its way out through the rainy season through, let's say, May time period. One of the things that guides the improvements of the system has been the Central Valley Flood Plan. The first release of it was in 2012, and in 2017 there was an update to the Central Valley Flood Plan. Besides the Central Valley Flood Planning efforts that guide the improvements in the region, there have been efforts to do a basin-wide and regional studies since 2012 through 2017. A number of basin studies were done by the Department of Water Resources and regional studies by local regional agencies in support of the Central Valley Flood Plan. Part of that is within one of the basin plans in Sacramento was then a look at Yolo Bypass itself in more specific detail. From there have been a number of other features very specifically within it. And then, of course, lastly, there's the actual weirs themselves, which are the predominant features that change a lot of the system performance in the region. This graphic here is a little bit of the current efforts under the Corps of Engineers to look at modifications of the Sacramento weir as part of what we call the American River Watershed Common Features Project, or WRTA 16. The project actually is composed of several elements: erosion repair on the American and Sacramento rivers, further improvements on the Sacramento River for seepage and stability, and then at Fremont Weir itself is looked to be improved, along with some additional raising of levees in key areas along the system. This effort by itself is funded at $1.5 billion under the current supplemental funding. One thing about the Sacramento Weir is that its performance, as we talked about, is at 112,000 CFS. The whole effort is with all these improvements along the Sacramento Weir is that the water can flow out of the American River at 160,000 CFS versus its current 115 design, and then make its way out through the Sacramento Weir and the Sacramento Bypass at 160,000 CFS. Currently, there's a proposal now to widen the weir. Current designs are basically just beginning to be initiated, along with setback levees being done by the Department of Water Resources, both on the Sacramento Weir and on the Yolo Bypass, known as the Lower Elkhorn Setback Levee Project. One of the things to note about this project is that this project is just one of two other major ones in the Sacramento region. Currently, there are efforts where 50% of the levee improvements have actually been done around the Natomas area north of the American River. And there's efforts to continue to make improvements on on Folsom Dam, a 3.5 levee raise at the dam, and its aspects of its saddle dams and dikes are actually currently part of the supplemental effort. So between the improvements at Folsom Dam and along with the Natomas improvements and with the American River and Sacramento River improvements, the city is looking at an unprecedented investment by the Corps of Engineers with support from the state and the regional at about $2 billion. One thing I'd like to acknowledge in this is that this $2 billion is slated to be done over a 5 to 7 year period. And to put a little bit of perspective is that there are improvements done in the region, in Natomas and at Folsom Dam over the last 25 years was about $2 billion. So over a 20-year period or so, $2 billion have been invested in the region. And now we're looking at another $2 billion to be done in almost a third of the time. So it's going to be a significant amount of activity in the region with the whole goal to raise the city's ultimate flood protection well above 200 and trying to meet a target as much as 500. A little bit more specifically, talking about the evolution of the flood control system itself and the modifications there in Yolo Bypass is the aspects of what was actually the original design of the system and what actually it was protecting. In 1917, a lot of this was more of an agricultural flood control system. There were some small urban pockets and there wasn't much of reservoirs in the area. Those reservoirs came online much after 1917. So it's been a system that's been built over time. One thing to note is that its original design of the system was to be bypassed, but the rivers themselves were designed to actually carry and scour flows to move a lot of the hydraulic mining debris at the time. Today, the hydraulic mining debris is long since passed and has been flushed out of the system. It's a highly erosive environment on the river system. One of the things we want to also note is that the urbanization, as we've talked about, is much greater. The aspects of diversity, the aspects of how we're handling the environment, and the aspects of reservoir management and water management itself has been changing the landscape of the region for some time, because the system has had a great evolution. A little bit about the Central Valley Flood Plan itself is that the Central Valley Flood Plan looked at a number of alternatives for improving the system with some of those considerations of what the current competing needs are. designing the system back or putting the improvements back to the original state plan of flood control design, essentially, which would be hardening the system in place, was at a huge cost, provided not necessarily the best flood control benefits, and also represented essentially not a great improvement in environmental and other multi-benefits. The Central Valley Flood Plan looked at just protecting high-risk communities and also looked at actually modifying, enhancing the flood control system by increasing its capacity, which came at great cost. Where the Central Valley Flood Plan finally settled is what they call the state system-wide investment approach, which blended some of the qualities of both improving the system in place, furthering the enhancements to the urban areas, and providing setback and other opportunities in providing environmental ecosystem improvements. And that's where the investment and strategy has been for some time. In 2017, there was an update to the Central Valley Flood Plan and also looked and incorporated the conservation strategy. For environmental, looked at operation and maintenance, continued to take in input from the basin-wide feasibility study and from the regional flood planning efforts. And essentially has elevated the cost a bit, but essentially has provided additional benefits both for ecosystem multi-benefits and in the flood management. A little bit about Yolo Bypass itself in the basin feasibility study. A number of the key features, as we've talked about, is the Fremont Weir, which is essentially provides water at the top of the Yolo Bypass. It takes water across the river from the Sutter Bypass. And then the Sacramento Weir, which we've talked about, which brings water out of the American and in the Sacramento River and makes its way in. Key features for improving those weirs, though, is to have expansion of capacity within the bypass. The Central Valley Plan, along with the basin study, looked at setback levees on the Elkhorn Basin, looked at West Side Bypass, and also looked at providing additional improvements at the lower end of the bypass, both at Egbert, Lookout Slough, and other locations. Another key aspect is looking at the potential to tie into the deep water ship channel. Currently, the ship channel is operational, but as time has gone on, its use has been reduced, and the economics of maintaining it and looking at opportunities of improved flood control in West Sacramento brings some opportunities for looking at the deep ship channel. Some of the key features identified in the recommended basin feasibility study shows a number of these features in the graphic. But in essence, it looks at putting setback levees both on Elkhorn. It looks at doing additional setback levees on the west side, and then it looks at doing the improvements on the southern end of the bypass. With these improvements, we're looking at a number of system performance along the lines where Fremont Weir expansion, along with Sacramento Weir expansions, you would see stage improvements, at least reductions of a foot or two at a number of key locations, particularly from downstream of Verona. And then you would see that a number of stage improvements would be on Sacramento River at I Street. This would be a significant improvement and also would address for climate variability and other future uncertainty and flood risk. To go on to the alignment moving forward and to take with this in mind with the state's initiative is that regional planning, what we call the Lower Sacramento Delta North group, created essentially a flood or a corridor management framework, a CMF as we call it. And the CMF looked to help guide the improvements in the Yolo Bypass. And particularly, it looked at how to further endorse the flood improvements that benefit the region. It also wanted to acknowledge and preserve the agricultural sustainability economy in both that Solano and Yolo County rely upon. It also looks to help conserve and improve the function of habitat, incorporate water supply and drainage improvements, and then lastly, looking for sustainable approaches to O&M in the region. All of these are key elements to further a project, as we would say, that all boats rise in the implementation and that all needs are met in the Yolo Bypass as the projects are implemented over time. To help assist with this, and efforts gone further, is the state of California, through the Natural Resources Agency, created essentially what we call a partnership group. The partnership group was predicated on acknowledging that there's, under the 2008-2009 BIOPS, there is a desire to see fish habitat and fish improvements and passage in the Yolo Bypass, It also acknowledges the Central Valley Flood Plan and its efforts both in the 2012 and its update in 17 ongoing. It acknowledged the regional planning efforts that were going on, and it was necessary to bring all those efforts together into a broad partnership. Today, that partnership reflects the interests of 15 federal and state and local agencies with a clear idea of the prioritize and help remove barriers to resolve in the implementation of improvements in the Yolo Bypass. Since the Yolo Bypass partnership, there have been a number of activities. One I've just discussed further is the aspects of the 2017 update and the conservation strategy incorporated in such, but also the Lower Sacramento Delta North adopted their own MOA of reassuring its own governance consistent with the implementation of the CMF. Further, there's been efforts working with the Corps of Engineers on how to provide Core 408 guidance on a multi-phase approach in implementation of projects within Yolo Bypass. The Yolo Bypass is a highly regulated environment, both on the federal side and on the state side. And working through its implementation and guidance is extremely important for success of the projects. There have been ongoing BIOPS projects at Wallace Weir, progressing fish gates at Fremont, and continue to look at restoration projects at Lookout Slough. Another efforts of the Department of Water Resources initiating the current EIR and project implementation of the Lower Elk Hill Basin levee setback projects, both at the Sacramento and Yolo Bypass. And then last year has been an effort by multi-agency effort, assisted by safety and the regional agencies with the Department of Water Resources to look at multi-objective project at Little Egbert at the southern end of the bypass. A lot of these are good efforts. They're leading to broad efforts of resolving many of the thorny issues in implementing the projects in the Yolo Bypass. This next graphic reflects what we call, in some ways, it's a regional map created by the regional agencies, but it reflects many of the projects that have been looked at both at the federal and state level. It includes the aspects of the bypass improvements at the Fremont, Weir, and the Sacramento, but it also reflects a number of other projects that the region is interested in seeing occurring, including protection for small communities, addressing the North Bay Aqueduct, looking at flood control projects at Rio Vista, but more importantly reflects a lot of other efforts, including the ones we described earlier. In some ways, we call this as more the mother map. It does reflect the current thinking. It's something that is likely certainly to evolve as further work and refinement is done. To help guide that and under the 408 approach, it's very important to look at, and one thing that's starting is initiating a process of the Central Valley Flood Board to do a letter of intent to create a master plan to help guide the implementation of projects within the Yolo Bypass. The current concept and under current recent guidance under the Corps of Engineers for 408, which allows for a programmatic approach, the state is looking, along with the regional agencies, to create a master plan and then go through another milestone of determining what it would be the programmatic hydraulic baselining to guide projects moving forward, and then to look at other programmatic elements that should be incorporated, those in the environmental and cultural resources. As a grouping of the projects based on their readiness and funding, is that they would be grouped together in different milestones moving forward over time. And the reflection of this graphic is to show that a project A, B, or C together along would go further to describe its hydraulic effects, and it would do its own follow-on detailed specific programmatic or specific EIRs or NEPA documentation. But the choreographing and the governance structure for having an overlying governance of how you manage the system along with project-specific activities need to be blended together to further the implementation of the projects. One of the things I wanted to highlight is an example of one project that's currently working through the process in advance, where setback levee is the Lower Elkhorn Basin. Again, 7-mile setback levee. I did this to really give folks a flavor of just the number of activities are currently underway. There's an aspect of a 1,500-foot setback levee, repairing corridor, relocating roads, utilities, replacing deficient levees. And then, of course, this project is expected to lower the surface water elevation in the bypass and the Sacramento bypass and Fremont or Yolo Bypass. It's important to acknowledge here there's a number of implementation efforts to do this, including relocation of the Bright landfill, which happened to be in the southern part of the footprint and relocated on the other side. There's also the aspects of consolidating the pumps. And again, there's a whole effort to improve the rural economy as we're making the improvements by reducing the costs to the local agencies as part of the implementation of the project. That also looks to incorporate an aspect of land use that's still conducive to providing the agricultural economy to the county and continue to provide in key areas where ecosystem can be incorporated. Furthering the project and how through the core or through the partnership efforts is to look at essentially how can we move short-term, midterm, and long-term projects together along the lines of the 408 roadmap. And again, right now, many of the projects we have are currently funded under Proposition 1 or Prop 1E, along with federal financing. These efforts essentially allowed us to move some projects forward in the 1 to 5 years. Additional funding and projects will be based on future funding to progress many of the elements in the what I call the 2 or 3 to 7 and on to the 7 and plus years. It is estimated that the cost of improving the Yolo Bypass as a whole will be is estimated at least $2 billion by the time we go from start to finish. And probably will take at least a 15-year period at best to make those kind of improvements. One of the key aspects, or what folks like to describe as barriers to program implementation, or as I'd like to say that really the converse, what are the success factors for being successful in implementing a project, is to address how do we handle the 408 master planning once just described, also looking at how to handle hydraulic baselining, elements of how the project can incorporate agricultural sustainability as they move forward, assurances to ESAs with the aspects of the ongoing operations of the O&M within the region, both at the reclamation districts along the way, plan for the long-term maintenance as you implement the project, and also addressing some of the long-term water quality issues that have been brought up by the regional board, particularly methyl mercury. All of these elements are difficult challenges to overcome, and of course, through the partnership, look to resolve each one of these issues as projects are implemented or as how we handle the projects with the system in mind. All of these efforts will be necessary for the successful implementation of the project. To help further that a little bit is going from the improvement plan is then its approaches to the barriers that I once described. There has been an effort by the partnership group to look at how to resolve each one of those barrier issues moving forward. And then looking at a structure of management between the programmatic or the partnership at a policy level, but interagency program collaboration, and then with the project executors themselves. A 3-tier type of management structure, institutional alignment is necessary for the success of the project. And creating this governance structure has been an aim at both the state and the regional agencies. And now we're looking at having the Corps of Engineers through the 408 efforts and their aspects of floodplain management services through their planning organization to assist in the programmatic efforts, truly becoming both a federal, state, and local effort. Also looking for the Bureau of Reclamation and some of the resource agencies also participate in the governance along those that have been signatories to the MOU. A little bit of a close-up to the structure itself is the programmatic or the partnership at the policy levels to look to make sure that policies and can support the implementation at the leadership level of the organizations, but actually creating a venue at a program level to provide some of the problem solving and tools necessary and shared advocacy needed for moving the projects forward in support of the agencies and in support of the projects below. And then it's at the project level where most of the specifics are actually worked out, particularly those that are related to the benefits, the permitting, and a lot of the challenges we described, some of the barrier issues that are addressed in each one of the projects. The final graph I have for you is a little bit of an overview of the overall program of the Yolo Bypass. Above is the aspects of the partnership agencies from the Bureau, Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries, Corps of Engineers, the regional agencies under the LSDN, which include Sacramento Flood Control, West Sacramento, RD 2068, Yolo and Solano County, and the Solano County Water Agency. All of them are critical partners in the regional level and have led to development of many of the efforts I described, including the regional plan in the area. Natural Resources, DWR, State Water Board, the Flood Board, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife are also big signatories of the MOU. All these agencies are committed to continue to progress the improvements and guide its implementation. And the next reconvening of the partnership meeting is expected to occur in December of this year. However, the bigger effort itself is to create the programmatic level to provide the necessary resourcing to guide the efforts and the alignment. And currently there are efforts by a number of the agencies highlighted here to start that alignment, looking to expand out to the other federal agencies as I've described. But really most important is then how do we do the implementation level, different number of projects showed by agencies and their initiatives. It does vary. Every given agency has a number of efforts that they're embarked on. Again, it's not done in isolation to other projects, and it's managed within a general system management under the Yolo Bypass. So this kind of concludes the presentation of some of the improvements in Yolo Bypass. This has been an effort that's really started since the release of the 12 plan, continues to progress its way in implementation. Great success has been occurred in a number of projects I've described, along with the project scheduled to be implemented. But the effort itself will take more time. A number of issues will be needed to be addressed along the lines I've described. But it starts with essentially the initiatives to get the governance structure in place to be able to resolve the issues, both at a policy, program, and project level. So with that, I would be happy to open up for any comments.